Good evening, everybody. I hope everyone is doing well. I'm certainly glad that you are joining us this evening to continue our study in the book of Philippians, the epistle of ecstasy. I love that description. The book of Philippians is a very, very uplifting book. It's an encouraging book, and I think there are many, many lessons we can glean from it. And what we've been doing, if this is your first time tuning in, what we've been doing, which by the way, all of the videos are on our YouTube channel. So if you're watching this for the first time or you miss a live session, it takes YouTube a little while to process the video that's being streamed right now. But usually no more than 12 hours, no more than a day, and you can just go right back and rewatch the stream. So if you miss a class, you can go back and get it. If this is your first time, you can go back to the beginning. I would encourage you to do so. We're going through the book sequentially, and we're trying to take it about paragraph by paragraph, about a paragraph a week. And someone might say, well, why does it take, that's going to take forever. Why do you do it that way? And there's a couple of reasons to that. Normally, if we were able to gather together, and of course we're having restricted services due to the coronavirus, the COVID-19 mess that's going on right now. And when we would come together, and we're all together in one room, we're actively learning together. And so we can go longer and deal with more material because we're engaged. But something happens when I go from being live in the same room with you to being separated, even though we're live right now. But we're also separated, and more than likely you're watching this on some kind of screen. And it may be a TV screen, and you're watching through a Roku device, YouTube, or an Apple TV or something, and what are you doing? You're probably not like this, leaning forward. You're probably leaned back. You're probably in your favorite chair and couch, and that's wonderful. I'm not trying to denigrate any of that. But it's not active learning any longer. When we're together, we're actively learning. When we're at home and you're watching this, you're passively learning. And that's a whole different creature. When we're together and actively learning, we can converse as we go through. I can see where you are as far as, am I communicating my ideas to you correctly? Are you understanding them? You can have questions, and we go back and forth, and there's something about being in a classroom setting live that just helps us learn better. And so we can go longer, we can cover more material, we can go a little bit faster. But when we're passively learning, all of a sudden our brain acts differently. We're still getting the material, but we'll reach that 25-minute mark or the 30-minute mark, and our brains just shut down. And it's because we're relaxed. We're not interacting. You're simply watching, and that hence the word passive. And all of a sudden, okay, you get this, but if too much information is coming down, your brain will shut off and say, okay, that's enough. And that's just the way we're wired. We're used to, when we're watching TV, watching it for entertainment value. And so our brain is thinking, okay, I'm in my recliner and I'm watching TV, and this is for entertainment. And so I'm going to lean a little bit, but not really a whole lot. It's just different. And so we're taking our time, and that's the whole point of all of that mess. We're just taking our time going through paragraph by paragraph. And so tonight we're still in chapter 1, and we're in verse 19, and we're going to cover 19 through 26, Lord willing. And again, we're in the epistle of ecstasy, the book of Philippians. And the whole point of this is to teach the Christian how to have joy in life and to be unified. And chapter 1 is key to all of that. It's foundational principles, because chapter 1, we find every aspect, even the greeting. At the very beginning, in those first 2 verses, every aspect revolves around Jesus. Jesus is the center of everything. And that fact is foundational to our being unified as God's people, to our having joy in life. And until we get Christ at the center of our life, where everything is about Jesus, where everything revolves around Jesus, True unity, true joy really is going to evade us. And that's Paul's point here in this letter. And so Paul starts off with a greeting that's completely centered around Jesus. He gives thanks and tells them he's praying for them, and that prayer, again, is completely surrounded around Jesus. He talks about his message and what he is preaching, and it's all centered right around Jesus. And now Paul is going to talk about his mission in life, beginning in verse 19. And in 19 through 26, his purpose, his meaning of life, his goal in life, again, is all centered right around Jesus, giving us that foundational idea that our lives must be centered around Jesus if we're going to have true unity and if we're going to have joy in life. And so that's where we are. So what we're going to do, like our habit has been, our custom has been during these lessons, we're going to read the paragraph, read the text, and then we're going to break it down and see how we can apply this text to our lives today. And so let's begin reading. We're in the book of Philippians chapter 1, beginning in verse 19. For I know that this will turn out for my deliverance through your prayer and the supply of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, according to my earnest expectation and hope that in nothing I shall be ashamed, but with all boldness, as always. So now also Christ will be magnified in my body, whether by life or by death. For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. But if I live on in the flesh, this will mean fruit from my labor, yet what I shall choose I cannot tell. For I am hard pressed between the two, having a desire to depart and to be with Christ, which is far better. Nevertheless, to remain in the flesh is more needful for you. And being confident of this, I know that I shall remain and continue with you all for your progress and joy of faith, that your rejoicing for me may be more abundant in Jesus Christ by my coming to you again. Okay, let's break this down. What is Paul's purpose in life? We find it in verse 20. He has a Savior-centered purpose, a Jesus-centered reason for his life. Verse 20, he says, so now also Christ will be magnified in my body. The idea of magnification, we understand that. We've played as children with magnifying glasses. You take the magnifying glass and maybe you're looking for detail in a little small object, maybe a stamp, maybe a coin. So you get the coin or the stamp underneath the magnifying glass and you're looking for details. You're looking to see every little ounce of any little bitty thing in there. If you're into photography, we understand magnification. If I go out and I take some nature photos and let's assume we're back about 20 years and we're actually using cameras that use film. And so I'll go out and I'll take like a beautiful sunset portrait, landscape portrait, and the sun's rising, all these hues of color, it's just gorgeous. And so I set it up and I take and snap that picture. And now I want to develop it. And so I go and I get it developed and I get back the normal snapshots, the 4x6s, and I'm looking at the picture and it's a beautiful picture. And yet, you know what? That picture's small. It's only 4x6, and I really want to put it on the wall, but that 4x6, no one can really see the detail in that, right? And so what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to take it back, and I'm going to get it blown up. That's magnifying it, isn't it? And so I have this 4x6, and I say, well, I want to make an 8x10 out of it. And I look, and I think, well, no, that's not enough detail. I want everybody to see as much detail as possible, and I want to see that as well as it sits on my wall. And so I'm going to go from 4x6. Let's go and take it to an 11x14. That's a nice big portrait size, and so we do that. And now I have that 4x6, and I can hold that in my hand and look at it. But now I have framed up on my wall this 11x14 of the same picture, and guess what? All of a sudden, it's the same picture. Oh, but you know what? I can see so much more detail in it. I can see the shadows as the sun's going down and how they play on the land, and I can't really see all of that in the small picture. I can see every hue of color coming off of beautiful sunset. And while I can see some of that in the 4x6, when it's magnified up there, I can see all of it, right? We blow up a picture because we want more detail. We want to magnify it, get as much detail out of it as, and this is what Paul's talking about here. This idea of magnifying is really, it comes from a word that literally means to make great. In other words, to make it so big that it just sends awe to everyone who sees. To make bigger. And so Paul says his purpose in life is that Christ is going to be magnified in my body. And so Paul's purpose is, okay, here's Jesus. And I want to so emulate Jesus in my life that people see the detail of Jesus' life when they look at me. When I preach Jesus, I want people to see all the detail of Jesus' life in the message that I'm giving. Paul wants to magnify Jesus. He wants to take Jesus and blow him up, using his life to blow him up so big, to make him so great that people see how wonderful and majestic and beautiful Jesus is. And then to be drawn to that. That's Paul's purpose. And do you see how his purpose revolves around Jesus? He wants to make Jesus great so people can see this enlarged image and all of the beauty of our Savior. Now look at it. He says, I'm going to do that, whether by life or by death. Now this, we have to go back and remember how Paul's writing this letter. He's writing it in chains. He's in jail. It's a house arrest situation, and he can have people coming and going, but the fact is he is chained to a guard 24/7. And he says, I'm going to do this. If I live through this ordeal that I'm going through, I'm going to spend my life making Jesus huge for all the world to see. But he also says, if this situation is going to cause my death, I'm still, through death, going to magnify Jesus for all the world to see. Again, whether by life or by death, Jesus is going to be magnified by Paul. Do you see how his purpose, his meaning of life, his purpose for life is centered solely around Jesus? But this also required a commitment by Paul. If Paul's going to magnify Jesus with his life, with his death, it's a commitment that he has to make. Look at the next verse. For to me, to live is Christ. Notice the wording there. I find the wording very, very interesting. For to me, to live is Christ. If I'm going to fulfill my purpose, Paul says, of magnifying Jesus for the world to see, so they can see every detail in Jesus, so Jesus can be made huge to the world. He says, for me to live is Christ. He doesn't say I'm living for Jesus. For me to live is Christ. He doesn't say Jesus is first in my life. He says my life is Jesus. Everything else is pushed aside. Everything else. And so that's why in verses 19 and 20, as his goal is to magnify Jesus, he says, I know, that is, there's confidence here that this situation is going to turn out for my deliverance through your prayer and through the care of Jesus. And so he has confidence that no matter if he lives through this or he dies through this, Jesus is going to be magnified. And he's asking for boldness and not to be put to shame by coming up short. so that his life or his death, again, whichever happens through the situation, is going to magnify Jesus. And for him to accomplish that, his life is Jesus. He's not putting Jesus first. His life is Jesus. Jesus isn't first in life. He is his all. And there's a difference there. There's a difference. It's amazing. It's just amazing. He has one reason to live. It mirrors what he would say in Galatians 2 and verse 20. I'm crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live. Yet not I, but Christ lives in me. In other words, it's off the shelf. It's off the table. This thought process of me, what's going to happen to me, what am I going to do, what am I going to gain, that is off the table. My life revolves around Jesus. And that's the example Paul gives. Now, here's where we bring it into our life. And this may make us, it makes me a little uncomfortable. What's our purpose in life? Ask yourself that. What's your purpose in life? We can look at the world and we see the world and the individuals in the world, they live for different things, don't they? We're in an election year and all of a sudden our TV is filled with ads of people living for power. You know, we see these career politicians and they get into the Senate or the House and they're there for 30, 40 years and it's all about power. And so they'll raise the issues that are important to the people or important to their party, and they'll get their base all drummed up to come out and vote. And then once the vote's done and they win, they just sit back on their laurels and they just kind of coast through until the next election time. And okay, let's talk about these issues again. And it happens on both sides of the aisle. They're living for power. Many people today live for wealth. There are individuals who will run over their own grandma with their truck just for $100. Sad, isn't it? Many people live for money. Some people live for pleasure. You hear popular music today, and I think it probably always has been, at least since I've been alive, but music always has a hedonistic attitude. It's all about pleasure. One song I loved growing up, and I love the music to it, but the singer sings, "Don't mean nothing," love the proper English, right? "Don't mean nothing but a good time. How can I resist?" What's he doing? He's living for pleasure. We live for money, we live for power, we live for pleasure. Sometimes we live for a mixture of the three. Sometimes we're kind of like the guy who used to be on Johnny Carson, who would spin the plates, and he'd spin one plate here, spin one plate here, spin one plate here. And there's our goals, all of our goals. And so we spin the plate of power, and we spin the plate of money, and we spin the plate of pleasure, and over here we spin the plate of Jesus, but we're juggling, right? If we're living a life like that, we're miserable. Paul says, my purpose isn't about money. Throw that dish, let it fall to the floor. It isn't about power, let it fall to the floor. It isn't about pleasure, let it fall to the floor. My purpose in life is to magnify Jesus Christ and to take his message, his example to the lost. It's an amazing, amazing singleness of thought, singleness of purpose, a single-minded purpose. And when we have that single-minded purpose, you know what happens to us? All of a sudden, we don't have things competing for our allegiance. We wake up and it's time for worship, and all of a sudden, you know what? Popularity isn't on the table anymore. It's all about Jesus. And so I don't really care what people think about me walking into services. All of a sudden, it's all about Jesus, so I don't care if work calls and asks me to work an extra shift and I can save up money for my vacation. It's not about power anymore. It's all about Jesus. It's not about friends anymore. It's all about Jesus. Single-minded purpose. to magnify Jesus in my life. Wow. As a result of this, here's the conclusion. For me to live as Christ, and because I live, not for Christ, but because Christ is my life, death is gain. Death is gain. That flies right in the face of what culture would say. The world doesn't look at death as gain because the world doesn't understand Jesus. We as Christians need a proper view of death. Paul says death is a benefit here. He views it as something that's desirable, and we're going to look at that in just a minute. I know I'm kind of running out of time, but we're going to look at that in a minute because Paul's going to say, I'm between a rock and a hard place here. I want to go to heaven. I want to be with my Savior. Oh, but I know I need to be here for you as well. He saw heaven. He saw eternity. He saw death as something to be desired. And he looked at death in the proper way, in the biblical way, that it's simply a departure. We are living in a world that's not our home. That's what we're studying about on Wednesday nights with Peter. And yet, here we are. We're living in a world that's not our home, and death is the way we go home. Paul had a tremendously intriguing view of death. When he says in verse 23, I'm hard-pressed between the two, having a desire to depart and be with Christ. The word depart there is very, very interesting because it's a word that means to take down the tent. Have you ever gone camping? Not a big fan of camping. Not a big fan of laying on the ground and sleeping on the ground. I'm not a big fan of critters that would crawl over me as I lay on the ground, right? But you have this house that you're living in. You have an apartment that you're living in. It has sturdy walls, has a foundation. And you decide to leave this sturdy house and to go put up a cloth tent, which is a piece of usually waterproof material that's stretched over some kind of stick made out of either metal or PVC or whatever. And so you put up this tent and you spend the night in the tent. That's camping. And what do you do in the next morning? You're not there forever. That's not your new home. No, when the time comes, you put out the campfire, you gather your things, you pack up the car, and you take down your tent. That's how Paul views his life. I'm taking down my tent. Verse 23, I have a desire to take down my tent and leave and go be with Jesus. And this connects also to what he says in 2 Corinthians 5, talking about if this earthly tabernacle or tent is dissolved, we have a home waiting for us in heaven. When we die, when we depart from this life, we're going to fold up our tent and move on to our permanent dwelling place. And for the Christian to have a proper view, to adopt Paul's view of death, we have to have Jesus as our sole purpose in life. You see, the Christian can view death. It's not we view death from the aspect of life, and we see those who've left us, and we've all lost loved ones, friends, relatives, family members. We've lost loved ones. We know the pain of death because we know the separation. And so many times we think of death as a separation, but death truly is a homecoming. That's why Paul could think of it as gain, because he looked at death as a homecoming. I look back over my almost 46 years and I think of brothers and sisters in Christ who I love deeply who've gone on. I think of family members who have gone on, friends who have gone on, left this world, and it leaves a hole in our hearts because we miss them so much. But when we depart, all of a sudden those holes are filled once again because there's a reunion that's awaiting. And there will be no more separation among the saints. There's a homecoming for the saint. I don't know if you guys growing up did this. I don't think we've done it here, but many times on certain anniversaries of when the congregation was established, sometimes the congregations where I would grow up, they would have homecomings. Usually it was connected with a gospel meeting. And they would go out and they would invite a preacher from the past to do the meeting, and a preacher used to work with the congregation. They would invite the community to come, and they would invite members who've moved away to come and let everybody know we're having a homecoming. That's what we would call it. And so Sunday comes around, and it's just great reunion, isn't it? See people you haven't seen in decades sometimes. And you catch up, and you share a meal after services, and you fellowship together, and you rekindle those relationships, but then you have to say goodbye again. You realize some people aren't there because either they couldn't come, or maybe their life is simply over and their time has come. There's a homecoming that's in our future. And it's going to put every other homecoming we've ever attended to shame. Because everyone who we've had to say goodbye to, all of the faithful are going to be there. But not just in a relationship way. Death is gain, because the trials that we face on this earth are going to be over. We face physical trials, don't we? I saw a little thing that said, enjoy your 20s, enjoy your 30s, enjoy your 40s now, because by the time you hit 50, that's when the check engine light comes on. There's a lot of truth in that. I haven't hit 50 yet, but I know that there are things that ache on me that didn't used to ache. My eyes aren't as good as they used to be. Everything is degrading. Our bodies are degrading, and they're built that way. Many of you have had knee replacement surgeries, and this year it seems like the cataract surgery is going around, and everybody's getting it because your eyes, you don't see as well as you used to, so you get improvements. You don't move as well as you used to, so you have to get an improvement and get things fixed. And so there are physical things and pains that we go through, but death brings an end to all of that. But I think even more than the physical, the emotional pains, the emotional trials that we go through, whether it's broken relationships, whether it's things from the past that haunt us still, whether it's pressures and stress just from the everyday life that we're living. All of those earthly trials, whether physical, emotional, they're going to be gone. That's why Paul can say in verse 23, it's far better. It is far, far better on the other side. Revelation 7:14 teaches us that that's our rest. We're entering into rest. David in Psalm 116 speaks of the death of a saint as being precious. John would say in Revelation 14 that the one who dies in the Lord is blessed. Death is gain. As Christians, we need to have the proper view of death and mimic Paul, who says that it's gain, who says that it's far better. But I want you to know the selflessness of Paul, a selflessness that's made possible because his purpose is centered around Jesus. Look at what he says. His goal, magnify Christ. He does it because his life is Christ. That's what he's about. And if he continues to live, that's what he's going to do. And if he dies, that's still what he's going to do. But then he says, if I live on, if I make it through all of this, verse 22, here's the positive side of it. I have to stay here on this earth, and I don't get the gain of heaven yet, but I'm going to reach more lost souls. You see how he's centered on Jesus? I'm going to be able to reach more of my Jewish kinsmen. If you go to Romans chapter 9 and Romans chapter 10, you see how desperate Paul was to convert his Jewish kinsmen. I can reach more of those. That's a good thing. So there's positives, there's benefits of me living through this and staying here on earth. But he says, what's going to happen to me, I don't know. And in verse 23, I'm between a rock and a hard place is how we would put it, wouldn't we? Oh, I want to go home and be with Jesus. Oh, I want to go home to that rest. It's far better. But notice his selflessness here. Verse 24, nevertheless, to remain in the flesh, that's better for you. He says, if I continue with you, two things are going to happen. It's going to help your progress. That is, it's going to help them grow spiritually. He's going to work with them. He's going to encourage them. He's going to help them learn and become more like Jesus. And so they're going to grow spiritually. And so he says it's for your progress, but also for your joy of faith. Do you see it? The selflessness of Paul. I know going to be with Jesus is far better thing for me, but for you, it's far better for me to be here because it'll help you grow spiritually. It will root you and help build you a foundation upon which you can stand, and that's going to bring joy in your life, and you're going to have a greater faith because I can be here and I can work with you. And me living through this, it's going to be for your benefit. So Paul says, I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place. Oh, I so desire to see heaven. I so desire to be with Jesus. But I also know you have needs here as well. I can reach more of the lost. I can magnify Christ longer in this life. And that's going to be a benefit for you because it's going to help to strengthen you and it's going to bring more joy to your life. Beautiful, beautiful sentiment. But again, notice, Paul's purpose is completely centered around Jesus. Worldly purposes that we see, they're not there. Paul's main concern is to show the world Jesus magnified so he can reach the lost and encourage his brethren. All right, we're going to stop here for the night. Lord willing, next Sunday at 5 o'clock, we're going to finish out chapter 1 and look at what Paul wants for the Philippian brethren. And again, we're going to see that it's centered all around Jesus. This whole beginning of this letter, the foundation for unity, the foundation for joy is Jesus Christ. And he's showing them by example and through the beginning of this letter that when you have the foundation of Jesus, you're going to be unified as brethren with a single-minded purpose. And as a result, you're going to have joy in your life. And so he's going to continue that thought as he talks to them about a plea that he has for them. He wants them to embrace some things. And we'll continue on with that next week. Don't forget Wednesday night at 7. Hopefully you can be here. Of course, if you can't, if you don't feel safe, we don't want to drag you out of the house by any means. We want everybody to be safe and to feel safe. So we will be live streaming Wednesday night services at 7. If you did not get the phone tree, I want you to know that there are a stack of song books. Sunday mornings as we worship together, the words are on the screen. And so you can follow along and sing along with us. Wednesday night, just technology-wise and time-wise, we're not able to do that. And so we want you to make sure you can still sing with us. And so the eldership has decided that they've gotten together some stacks of books. They're in the basement. They're for you to take and to use on a temporary basis. Because one day, this is all going to be over. And we're going to be able to meet all together again. And that's the goal. But until that time, if you don't feel safe getting out because of health conditions or whatever the reason, maybe you've been exposed and you need to stay home, come by the building, go to the basement. They're in the basement. You can go straight to the basement door, pick up a book for you and your family. You can use it temporarily. when this is all over, or when it gets to the point where you feel safe coming back to services, bring the book back and return it. But for now, you can borrow it and sing along with us on Wednesday night. We don't want to leave anybody out. We're trying to get everybody involved in that. And also Wednesday nights, we're studying the book of 1 Peter. And we want to make sure you know that, again, it's streaming along with the song service on Wednesday night, but we're also here together at 7 p.m. on Wednesdays. So if you can be here live and in person, that's wonderful. If not, join us online and let's continue that study together. Sunday morning, 10 a.m., Lord willing, we'll be gathered together for worship. And then, of course, as already mentioned, Sunday nights at 5, we're going to continue walking through the book of Philippians just a little bit at a time. And I hope you're seeing what a beautiful book this really, really is. I love delving in deep to these studies. I love not being constrained to a 13-week, quarter-long study. I love being able to get right into it. I always wondered, I remember in the school of preaching, we would get really deep into these texts, and there was just so much there I'd never heard before. And I grew up in the church, and I grew up studying these things and these stories and different accounts and the biblical histories and the narratives. And I remember sitting there thinking, why was this never taught in the congregations where I was attending? And really, I think one of the big issues is we constrain ourselves to a 13-week quarter. And we try to get a certain book, or usually the smaller books, we'll pick 3 or 4. And we'll do not just Philippians in 13 weeks, which is probably doable to a good extent, but we'll take all the prison epistles. And so we'll throw them all together and try to get with. And as a result, we continually just overview these books. I like getting right into the text of the book. There's so much that we miss when we don't do that. And so that's why I just like to take my time and just go paragraph by paragraph and look at the text and see what we can glean and put it all together in the context and see what the Holy Spirit through these earthly penmen are trying to tell us. I hope you're benefiting from it. I hope it's a blessing for your life. Okay, well, we're going to end here. So thankful that you joined us tonight, and Lord willing, you'll join us again on Wednesday night, either live or online, and then we'll see each other again next Sunday as well. All right, hope everyone has a good week.